for questions, and if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, Bob will, right here, Bob.
Okay, and it sounds like the mic is actually working. So, couple ground rules. If you would please, when you do ask your question, let us know who you are. You might let us know where you're from. Obviously, have your question ready, and let us know if you have a preference who you want to direct the question to. So, I'll start with this beautiful lady here.
You're kind. Hi, I'm Kathy Canty. I'm here in Twin Falls. My biggest question, the reason I actually came tonight, is that I want to know what the best opportunity to make a difference is. I know a lot of us are super busy. You work full time. I'm a mom. I don't have a lot of spare time, and I really want to change the direction things are going in. Where is my best chance of being effective?
He's the most active.
Just keep it.
Yeah. Well, my somewhat selfish answer, but it is a real answer. Make sure you go to reclaimidaho.org and sign up for our email newsletter. Because we're regularly putting out information about how people can get engaged. What we've started to envision for the coming weeks and months if you're interested in the school voucher issue, is we are going to join together with supporters of public education all across the state and put together a series of town hall events focused just on the voucher issue. And what's going to be really important is those are going to be completely nonpartisan, cross-partisan, just focused on that issue. When the governor was getting ready to sign that new law, 73 Idaho superintendents signed a letter opposing that law. That's more than half of Idaho's superintendents. And overwhelmingly, those superintendents came from very conservative communities, and they oversee school districts in small towns all across Idaho. We're going to really, and you had a similar thing from school board trustees all across the state, teachers. Our goal is to bring as many of those people together, have panelists that are made up of, have panels made up of superintendents and trustees and things like that. What we're going to be looking for is people like you and people like many of you to get engaged in making those events as successful as possible by not just showing up yourself, but by taking some time in the weeks leading up to those events, and there's probably going to be several of them right around here in different parts of the Magic Valley, putting in some work in the weeks leading up to those events to really help get out the word about it. Anyone who's in your broader network. And so much of what we do at Reclaim Idaho is we think, so I talked about, people need to be engaged, and then you're asking, what does it mean to be engaged? We think in terms of a ladder of engagement, like rungs on a ladder, and the very bottom of the ladder is just barely aware that the issues even exist, right? And then you go up to informed about the issues. Then you go up to a point where you're not only informed, you know enough to where you could actually have that conversation at the golf course and maybe even persuade someone about the issue. And then you get all the way up to the point where you're willing to volunteer and maybe even go knock on a door to talk about the issue with a stranger, which I promise you isn't as scary as you might think if you've never done it. You just have to try it a few times. But then you get all the way up to the point where you're a local leader, where you are actually inspiring other people to volunteer. And then who knows, maybe after that you end up running for office like these two. But that ladder of engagement, so it's important to think about where you're at on that right now. And if you're angry or if you're upset or concerned and you don't feel like you're doing enough, try to move up a rung on that ladder. Try to be someone who's that much more engaged. And the simplest way I can think about it right now is for what we're trying to do is Reclaim Idaho. If you can get plugged in through our website to our newsletter and be a part of this these town halls we're gonna do. And just 5 more seconds, we're also gonna be rolling out a petition. It's not a ballot measure or anything like that. It's not gonna put anything on the ballot, but it's going to be a petition to lawmakers to say the basic name of it is gonna be not $1 more for school vouchers, not $1 more. And it's going to say, demand that lawmakers, regardless of party, vote no on any bill that would lift the $50 million cap. Demand that they vote no. So another way that hopefully you'll be able to get engaged is by making sure not only do you sign on to that petition, but get as many people in your community signing on so that everyone in your network is also at least thinking about how important this issue is.
Now, Luke's wonderful, he's on a state level, but here, Twin Falls Network has a great network. I mean, they have their website up. There are, like Dawn said, there's a event on April 5th that is here in Twin that puts things out. Indivisible has some different events. They have, get together and write 20 postcards. You guys have done those in the precincts in the area. Look at the Twin Falls site. They've got some great events that lead up into state jobs. But our lives are busy. And if I can sorry, Luke, if I can just go over to the neighbors and we'll write 20 postcards and get them in the mail. If you could make that phone call to Governor Little's office. There were 32,000 of us that asked him to vote no. And you know what? We'll make him remember that when it comes to the ballot box. When the election comes up, remember what you did. But it's about supporting even what we have here when we get to the elections. We look at that and Reclaim Idaho. There's always something, depending what rung you want. But locally, Twin Falls Dams have lots of events going on. And Indivisible is around. Where's Heather? What's the other one you're doing? Hands?
It's called the Hands Off Protest.
Yes, on that one.
50501 or 50.
Yeah. 5051 has lots of is doing lots of events. So there's places that you can find just a little bit of your time, and we thank you for that. We really do.
Let's try, I think this gentleman here.
My name is Luke Rummel. I live in Jerome, Idaho. I have a question for Ms. Toombs. As an educator, what do you feel about the governor encouraging school boards to use suppression? What I mean by that is one of the educators put up a sign recently in her classroom saying what she felt was her constitutional right to put something up. And the governor, we all know the governor's putting the word down not to put stuff like that up. What are you going to do about that?
You can be a nice little rebellion in there. That's a fine line. They had a policy, but yet in West Ada School District, they had a policy that, schools are scrambling to try to follow what's come down the line with the DEI materials. But you can't have it. It was the hands in that poster that truly made the difference, because the poster that was in one school that had no graphic with it basically said, all students are welcome at this facility, yada, 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 no picture. The poster in her classroom had the hands of all different colors. And we all make those choices, bless her heart. And there could be a twinge on her record, there's always that choice, but every one of us make that choice. And we make it according to what we think is right. because we're talking children. Not gonna let children, I'm not gonna promote everybody's accepted. And how that looks, whether it's hands with a heart, these are children. And it'll be interesting to see what the school district does in West Ada, our largest school district. You know what? She'll have a job any place she applies.
I just want to speak to that briefly because you asked, is it a constitutional right for a teacher? Is it constitutionally her right to put that up in the classroom? And maybe that gets into complicated questions about district policies and all of those things, and maybe that's not clear. But what's become very clear is that it's morally right to have a sign like that in your classroom. And it seems very clear to so many people all across the community in West Ada, in the Treasure Valley. I noticed that this weekend there's an event that some people put on where they're going outside of the school district offices, and they're just they're getting a bunch of families and kids together to do chalk on the sidewalk in support of the basic everyone is welcome message. And I saw on social media there's already like thousands of people signed up, so we'll see what happens. I don't know if there's going to be enough room on the sidewalks for all the little kids that are going to be out there, drawing hearts and hands with different skin tones and all of that. But it became very clear with that whole debate that what the district was saying was, we don't know if they're on solid constitutional grounds. I'm not sure I could speak to that. But what they're saying is morally indefensible. The idea that you can't put up some different hands of different skin tones and have that in your classroom in 2025, or really any time in history. But it's just, and that teacher, yes, God bless her, because she took a stand and she's winning the public argument. And I don't think it's just a partisan thing. I think a lot of people admire the stand that she's taken in that district.
Another question? Try to be fair here and get around a little bit.
Sarah Harris, Twin Falls, Idaho. I just need a little education here. It's my understanding that the Blaine Amendment is still part of the Idaho Constitution. And so I'm wondering how in the heck the school voucher program got as far as it did.
So good question about the Blaine Amendment. The Blaine Amendment is in the Idaho Constitution, and it says that pretty clearly that tax dollars can't fund religious education. And we know that a whole lot of the private schools who are now eligible for tax dollars to cover tuition are religious schools. So how does that make any sense? And you might be asking, how did that pass through the legislature? Why were so many people willing to vote for it? And why hasn't it already immediately been struck down? The first thing I'll say is this is one of those moments where it'd be great if someone like Justice Jim Jones were around to, give an answer. And I do recommend that if you're interested in these questions of the constitutionality of the vouchers, follow Jim Jones online. He has a website called JJ Commentator. And that's how it's spelled. So you can follow, he's got a little blog on there where he posts columns that then end up being op-eds in newspapers around the state. But he writes a lot about school vouchers, and he has some very strong opinions that in fact they are unconstitutional, and he's interested in bringing a constitutional challenge. One reason why they haven't immediately been struck down in states all across the country is there were some United States Supreme Court rulings that found that, and I might not get this entirely right, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but my understanding is that some of the United States Supreme Court rulings basically found that once there is, a state does not need to give funding to religious education if it doesn't want to. But once there is a voucher or a voucher-like program that's giving tax dollars to private schools, the Supreme Court ruling found that they can't then deny religious private schools those funds as well. So if they're going to give to any private school, they can't deny religious. And some people believe that that basically means the Blaine Amendment is no longer effective. And it's basically superseded by the United States Supreme Court ruling. But others disagree with that, and it may very well end up in a challenge within the next month, few months, or maybe the next year.
Questions?
I think Luke gave a pretty good analysis of it. It was a Massachusetts case. And the end result was, if you're going to give public tax dollars to one school, you got to give it to all of them. And so that brought in the church schools and everything else. So, and there's some controversy about whether or not that would be applicable in the Idaho case. We'll see.
Most of it came when I was in the legislature with the Blaine Amendment. Our saving grace that the Idaho, we'll see where it flushes out in the court, is the Idaho public school dollars, education funding, has never been given to any private entity. And so therefore, our Blaine Amendment is still intact. There's no, just like you said, if you gave it to one school, then you have to give it to all of the private schools. And a lot of that in Montana, that happened because they gave it for special ed funding to a private school. And Montana sued, Blaine Amendment fell in Montana because they had given public funds for special ed funding to a private school. In Idaho, that has never happened yet. Mm-hmm. So if this ends up in a court of law, don't know how it's going to shake out.
Questions? This lady here was.
Thank you. I have several things to mention, but one of them is the sign issue. If that teacher had taken a picture of the children in her classroom with short sleeves, she would have had the representation that was on that billboard. And that just really angers me that there's even been a contentious, any discussion on that. But number two is, my name is Kate Lopez, by the way. I was a Republican for 40 years. I've been here 45. And I worked for the Internal Revenue Service for 31 of those years. I just retired several ago. And I left the Republican Party because I couldn't stand it anymore. I mean, I told that to a friend and she said, no, the Republican Party left you. And I think that's a pretty good analysis. But I think every day I try to figure out what I can do and what will become effective. And I think we have a huge messaging problem with the people in the state. All the years I've been here, people don't vote in the state. They don't vote in Twin. And if you talk with people and you're always on the defensive. They have to make a phone call to be one of those 37,000 people that say no to vouchers. That takes some effort. But if you can, so they're making the action themselves. You're actually encouraging somebody to take a move. But once they move, then they might actually vote. But the problem in this, that I see in this state, is that people don't understand the implications of the law. We've been very complacent for the last 40 years. We haven't had to pay attention to the legislature because they've actually been doing things that, for the most part, make our state and our daily life better. Those things are falling fast now, and everyone's had to be given a crash course on the law. I work with a group with Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action on safe gun control, giving out gun locks and telling people to keep their guns in a safe at home so kids don't blow their heads off. I'm on a rapid response team that looks at the law. As they come out every day, I get a legislative action note. And the proposed laws, including the gun laws, come out. I try to read that text, and because I'm not an attorney, I was a CPA, I don't understand the implications of those laws. So there's an attorney that works with every town. They go over them and try to give people a little insight on what some of that language could entail. What does it mean? What are they trying to get across? Why is the party trying to get this particular gun law or any other law in place? But, you know, for those of us that are not involved with the legislation, we have no idea what that language means. It seems very innocuous and it seems fine. But once you can kind of understand things that happen, that the purpose of some of those laws coming up, then you can form an opinion on how it should be voted on. And I think people in the state are still, in a sense, not understanding what's happened and how they can make a difference, just like this lady in front asked. It would be very helpful to me and to those of us that are out talking to our neighbors and standing on the corner with 5051 and protesting with Indivisible, if we can say, these are the legislative actions that were taken, this is why we decided to vote no on it. These are people that have been involved with the legislature. This is what we're worried about with school vouchers, because the 400 million cap, if I hadn't come here tonight, I would never have known that. So I have to go to 15 sites to try to figure it out. It would be helpful if your groups could put out facts, it's printables that people can download and take to certain sites, have laws and the way people have voted, rather than a month before the vote, have it come out when the legislative session has been completed. How did your representatives vote on every single issue? And give people 6 and 8 months to mull it over and talk about why they're not going to vote for an extremist on the far right, because they voted for these 5 crazy bills that don't make any sense and they're awful. They're all morality bills that are not making any sense. I think people need to be given a little more time and understand how the bills are going to affect them. I'm probably just running at the mouth, but I'm trying to think of all the things that anyway, some suggestions that would be helpful for those of us that are just living life. You know, out here, we're not in any particular job like you guys are.
Suggestion to Lou. Do you want to respond to it?
Sure. Yeah, I think in some ways this goes back to the question of how to get more engaged. I think it's really important that you think about, give some thought to the issues that you care about the most. Like, what are the issues that are really troubling you to the point where you would show up here? And try to find at least one organization out there. Sometimes it's a national organization. I think it's even better if it's more local. But an organization that you have some trust in, where you can rely on them for information, for a flow of information about all these things that sometimes are pretty technical. So for our organization, and I'm talking about issue-based organizations. So you talked about the gun safety. That's not one of the issues we focus on, but we focus mainly on these 3. Affordable health care, strong public schools, the right to the initiative process are the main 3 that we focus on, and we do, I believe, exactly what you're talking about. So if you get on our email newsletter list, you'll get, and God bless all of you who stay subscribed, because you get a pretty steady stream of newsletters coming in. And there's a lot of that. It's breaking news. This new bill has emerged, and we do our best. We have a small staff. We do our best to break down the details of exactly what is in the bill so that people understand it. And then And then we do our best to break down the process. So here's the next, now it's going through this committee. Oh, sadly, it just passed out of the committee. Here's who voted for it. Here's who voted against it. So we try to do that. And if you are engaged in one or all of those three issues, healthcare, public education, ballot initiative rights, I highly recommend getting on the going to reclaimidaho.org, getting on the newsletter. If those aren't your major issues that you're most deeply concerned about, try to find an organization that is speaking to your issues, because that's right. As a citizen who's not an expert in policy, it's really hard to sort through this stuff without someone or some organization that you trust that's actually going to do that work on a more or less full-time basis. So that's my best answer to what you talked about.
So the Twin Falls Democrats do try to, well, all of these Democrat party or county Democrat parties try to gather this kind of information to provide to people. And we have a couple of people, Phil Ulick, who is our state committee man, and Julie Taylor, who is our state committee woman, each week participate in this Idaho Democratic Party communications call. And in this it's a Zoom call, and actually anybody who's interested could sign up for this, but they participate in it, listen to what's going on, because they cover the most, they don't cover all the bills that are going through, because you can't, but they try to pick out the ones that are controversial, and they provide updates. And then Phil will send out updates of these calls. And so if anybody here is interested in getting a summary of these weekly calls, let us know, because Phil would be happy to put you on the email list, and it's really easy to do. But he sorts that out, and it's one way of being able to keep up with different activities. It is still kind of a daunting task to look at all of these bills and not feel like, oh my gosh, this is way too much. But once you kind of get into it, it makes a lot of sense, or it all starts to make some sense, and it becomes easier to follow. And you can actually even track how each of these legislators in districts 24 and 25 vote on every bill throughout the legislative session. And that's one of our goals, is to put all that together at the end of this legislative session to provide to people, so that they can see how their legislators voted on all these issues. So, yeah.
Questions?
Thank you, Luke, for what you do. We've followed everything you've suggested. I think my frustration is when I write to my legislators here is I don't feel like it's making any difference, because I don't think they will listen to a thing I'm saying.
You get the craziest email response that I no longer write, because I feel like if you're dissenting how they feel, you get an absolutely idiotic reply that makes me think, did you even read my email? You're not even responding to what I said. And I'm kind of piggybacking onto your question. What do we do?
I'm sorry, I forgot to say I'm Melody Linkner from Twin Falls.
And I'm Teresa Smith. I mean, what do you do with a governor that gets that many things saying no? That bill that passed last year with the library, and that he even said after he passed it, it was a stinking bill.
Yeah.
He says that on a lot of them. When he signs a bill, you always get a letter when you're in the legislature. You always get a letter from the governor,
buddy.
and they read it, and it usually says, this bill will be close to passing mustard, or he'll make some comment that he signed it, but it's gonna end up in a court of law.
And
You
he knows
always,
it's wrong.
always
And he
enjoyed
knows
that.
it's wrong. I mean, he knows it's wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he does. But it's politics at that point.
Well, so can you address that feeling? Is there anything, I mean, like you reported, we all called Governor Little and he didn't listen. And our 3 legislators here,
25 or 24.
well, 24 in our case,
Well, 24, did you go to their town hall meetings that were 40 minutes long?
no, I couldn't.
They had town hall meetings that they quickly went through District 24. They started out in Gooding, they ended up in Gooding, Hagerman, Buell. I think they went to Filer, Kimberly. Anyway, they were 40 minutes long and they talked for 30 of them. So you didn't get any chance to, ask questions.
And they were in places that they didn't announce. ahead
No,
of
we
time.
found out 24 hours in advance. I was so disappointed when I was asked, there was one question that I asked about the growth in Idaho. How can you cut back school funding and all of this? And didn't answer my question. He said, well, you know, if you vote one way, you'll have half of your constituents mad. If you vote the other way, you have the other half mad. So I just vote the way I think is right. And all I said to him was, that's not representing your constituents. But that's what our legislators are doing. They're listening to a minority, just like Governor Little did, but you can't stop. We have to point out, I wrote to Glenita once, and I'll use her name, and told her a flaw in her, she did a Substack, and Dawn knows this one too, that she completely said it was $5,000 and it was for a mobile lab for the Science Foundation, and she was going to vote against it. What in the world are you doing voting against science for kids? But she totally misinterpreted the financial budget, and she sits on JFACT. And she goes, I made a mistake, but she didn't put that out in the public. She eventually wrote me back and said, I did a mistake. That's all I got from her, and she never corrected it. You gotta just I'm putting that in the back of my mind because I'm gonna point that out to her in public. And that's where the information comes out.
Questions?
Could I speak to that? Because
Go ahead.
you were originally asking me about, I think because we send out these newsletters asking people to email their legislators or call their legislators, call the governor, call the governor. And I think it's a very reasonable question. Over and over again, you've tried, they don't listen, so what's the point, right? That's how I interpret that question. Well, I'll just say 2 things. One, we always, as Reclaim Idaho, and I think a lot of organizations are like this, we always try to be strategic. So we don't actually ask you to call or email the sponsors of the Medicaid expansion repeal and ask them to vote no on the Medicaid expansion repeal, right? So there are several of your legislators who represent this area who've joined a group. You can look it up. They call themselves the Gang of 8, and they are laser-like focused on trying to repeal Medicaid expansion and take away healthcare from 90,000 people, right? We're not going to ask you to email the Gang of 8 to protect our healthcare. Like, they've made it very clear that they want to take away our healthcare, right? So we're always going to be strategic in at least asking you to call or email people who are at least remotely persuadable. And you might say the governor is totally unpersuadable at this point, and I would sympathize with that. But you should know that the governor, we had a major effort to call the governor back in 2019 when the legislature passed a bill that would have basically ended the initiative process in Idaho, and he vetoed it. And it was one of these things where 9 out of the 10 calls to the governor's office said, no, protect the ballot initiative process. Citizens should have a right to participate. And the governor took the side of the people in that case and vetoed it. So the fact that it doesn't always work doesn't mean it's not worth trying. And the last thing that I'll say to this is that sometimes when you fight hard, you win. Sometimes when you fight hard, you lose. But even when you fight hard and you lose, a lot of the time, you sow the seeds of a future victory. And that's why it's still worth it. So for example, 32,000 people called the governor's office. We still lost. But in the process, we stirred up a kind of righteous anger all over the state that is now the seeds of the next fight. And we're much better off than we were before because of that. So that's what you got to do. And sometimes even when you lose, you end up stronger. And you're certainly a lot stronger than you would have been if you'd done nothing.
Okay, I saw a hand somewhere over here.
Here, let me pass that to you.
Thanks.
Sure.
I am quite optimistic about a lot of things. Do I have to? Oh, my name's Lori Steedman.
Yeah.
I'm from Twin Falls. I don't like to stand up. But anyway, I'm pretty optimistic about what I'm seeing. We've gone to a lot of protests, and there's several things going on, like with the BLM, and how many people through Washington, Utah, and Idaho are upset about something about them buying the land and letting rich people get that land, and that'll bring money in so they can pay for firefighters. There's a big group of people there that are involved. And I'm just wondering, this is important. You can say whether I should be optimistic or not, but I'm just wondering, are you feeling that there are more people out and wanting to know what's going on, seeing more people protesting at the Capitol, seeing more people getting involved? Are you seeing that?
The short answer is yes. So I mentioned it earlier, but with the school voucher bill, House Bill 93, there were far more contacts to the governor's office than on any bill ever in Idaho history. And that includes when people were concerned about, nuclear waste in the Snake River and things like that. So that it's a big deal how many people are getting engaged. That number, 37,000 people communicating with the governor's office, I looked it up. That's about the same number of people who participated in the Republican presidential caucus, who voted in the Republican presidential caucus. So just to kind of put it in perspective, that's about the number of people who voted for Trump in the Republican presidential caucus. And then a few people voted for Nikki Haley too, and that maybe made it to 39,000. But that gives you a sense. There was a huge rally today at the Capitol to protect public lands. I still haven't seen the numbers, but it looked like it might have been thousands of people. There's a general sense that public institutions are under attack, and all around the country. And we didn't talk about this much yet, but one of the things that I believe everyone should be watching very closely when you talk about healthcare, we're now at the end of the legislative session, and Medicaid expansion is still intact. But at the federal level, there's this big question of what is this huge tax cut bill going to look like? Well, it's called the Budget Reconciliation Bill. It's that it's the Trump administration's big, crown jewel bill that they're trying to pass. It's the one big bill of the whole cycle that they're trying to pass, pretty much. And they're trying to cram everything into it. And we know there's going to be huge tax cuts, and from everything I know, it's mostly going to go to very wealthy people and corporations. But we know that's going to happen. But the big question is whether they also include up to $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid. And one of the ways they're talking about doing that is by repealing every Medicaid expansion program in the country, including Idaho. And some of the Republicans in the United States Congress talk about Medicaid expansion as an illegitimate program, as basically fraudulent. And they talk about it as just a wasteful program, because why would we give health care to able-bodied adults? This is supposed to be for children and the elderly and the disabled. Well, guess what? In one of the most conservative states in the nation, Idaho, 61% of people wanted health care for their neighbors, even when they voted on it back in 2018. And they didn't care if it was an adult and whether they had children or not. They see their neighbors as hardworking people who need health care. And that's here in Idaho, one of the most conservative states in the country. So we know that's true nationwide. People don't want $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid. But they're going to try to do it. And it's going to get really intense all across the country. And the margin of the Republican majority in the United States House of Representatives is only, 4 seats? So it's going to be a battle in the coming weeks and months. And people getting engaged here locally, all across Idaho, it really adds to the environment nationally, where we could start to just see massive gatherings of people, kind of like what happened today at the Capitol. People coming out, even in smaller groups all over the state, and then you combine that with it happening all across the country, it could very well be that the whole bill just collapses and that Medicaid is protected all across the country. And that's, we desperately need that to happen.
All right. Take one more question. I think we're about to wrap it up.
Someone who hasn't had a chance.
Here.
Sorry, Jim.
We'll have two
Sorry,
more
Jim.
questions. We'll-
My name is Maria Alma Hernandez, and I'm a first generation Mexican American, but I also have thick Indian blood running in me. But I wanted to piggyback off what I saw on national news, which is they had removed Jackie Robinson and also the Code Talkers, and they brought it to light, and within 24 hours it was back up on the website. But I also want to say that and this is a testimony of the fact that, and I liked it, what you said about, you still have a voice. We have a voice, and you wrote to the legislators. And I actually had a situation 3 years ago where I went to City Hall for an issue. I would go every Monday. You get 3 to 5 minutes to talk. You speak to the mayor and the whole panel of City Hall. And it was a big issue, and I kept pushing forward. And I'm sure Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, before she decided to do what she did and, stand up for yourself. You got to stand up for yourself in this day and age. So I did that with City Hall. The thing is, there was a lot of perseverance. And I went several times to City Hall, and I only got 3 to 5 minutes on that mic, so you got to use your words very wisely. So in that situation, I had a victory. It was a big victory for me, in that the unelected official, City Attorney Shane No, was fired. Nobody knows the story, but I do. Because I asked for an external investigation of an unelected official who did something very negative, which I can't get to on the mic in this short time. and I want Jim to talk too. But I want you to know that on Monday night, and that also went about through the power of prayer and my faith in God, which I am not ashamed of. Because I was on my knees a lot praying. And he went through, and I got the victory through him, and he gets the glory for what happened in my situation. But sometimes you have to press and you have to push. But what I'm seeing is when that lady said she wrote to her legislatures and nothing happened, she was discouraged. Now, another avenue to speak and have a voice is through City Hall. Mayor Pierce, the whole panel, you even got first responders behind you to back you up. You know, they're just sitting there, but hey, something happens. Guess what? You got backup. I'm good friends now with Chief Kingsbury, friends with Mayor Pierce. And, you know, I'll say hello to him if I run into him. And, you know, I guess it's our little secret, but it's out now on this day, March 22nd, 2025. I have a voice. And I had victory on that day. I want to encourage others that when you step out, like I'm going to step out Monday. I'm going to go because they're having March 24th, which would be Monday. The teacher, they're selling T-shirts. You can buy them online, but there's just so much supply and they can't keep up. So I'm going to get mine done here locally. I'm going to go down to City Hall, and I'm just going to go and say that I want to stand behind that teacher who stood up, just like Rosa Parks did. She's standing up for her rights, and we have a voice. And, you know, just like someone said, hey, Jackie Robinson was taken off. The Code Talkers were taken off that website. They saw something morally wrong. And John Lewis, who's another hero of mine, he said we have a moral obligation when something's not right is to say something. And so, you know, you get 2 to 3 minutes on that mic. But, you know, also, you were writing to the legislators. When you have a voice and you can echo that voice, you're getting the emotions out of you, your anger, your discouragement. At least you're getting it out. And you can walk away with that, with your shoulders a little bit lighter, your heart a little bit lighter. You don't understand the emotional trauma of what it is to just contain something and hold it in, you know? Like right now, I have a soft spot for my senior citizens, you know? And I found these two, oh, the other one's left, but these two, you know, doing protests. And, you know, I did my little protest too. I did it all by myself, but I had a myriad of angels following me. And on a corner of Washington and Addison, about what had happened to me. And, you know, if you have to do something, it's okay to do it afraid. It's okay. If you're going to do something and stand up for your rights, it's okay to do it afraid, but do something. You have an obligation. And I see the hearts of citizens here, and I was born and raised here in Twin Falls, Idaho. I see the hearts of people in here that are hurt, damaged, losing sleep at night because of what's going on in our nation. And I'm right there with you. But I just wanted to piggyback that going to City Hall is another means to have a voice. You step up to that mic and you say, oh, I want to say that I'm so proud of that teacher in West Ada County, which I lived over there for 30 years. That I'm so proud of that teacher who's stepping up, and I'm here to come to the mic to say I support her.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. So let's take one last question. You still want to?
I can if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, because you've raised your hand several times, and then we'll end the evening. So.
Want to fight for it?
He'd win.
All right.
Hi, my name is Rick Box. I was born and raised here in Twin Falls. You had said that the federal funding and DOGE, they're trying to just decimate it. And we're aware of the Medicaid and education, like recently education it's going to get an overhaul. the federal funding is going to go away, how is the state's like financial health for the other things like the VA, for veterans, for our state parks, for our parks, our outdoors that we enjoy so much? How does it look, and should we be concerned about all the other things that aren't necessarily being talked about? And if so, what can we do?
What I have seen coming through JFACT, I've been trying to keep track, they've completely upended 2 years ago how JFACT does. Every agency has a budget, and in that budget, there's a base budget, and then there's the request for the new funding. We used to take every agency as itself and went through everything. You divide it up and you go through it with a fine-tooth comb. 2 years ago, they turned it upside down and then just passed the base budget, which means it's the same as last year. Then they haven't passed any of the extras as of a week ago. They are still arguing. They have been arguing they don't want to fund anything extra. State parks, nothing there yet. New people, they just haven't done anything yet. And it's getting real scary because if they need, I mean, the extras that are needed, like to a mobile lab for the science programs, it may not come through. For teachers' salaries, there's no extras. I mean, there's no raise. They just last year's. There's transportation, and we all know what's happened to the price of gas. Transportation's only paid at 85% anyway.
Are federal funds part of that? Are part of the state budget?
No,
Okay,
none. Which makes me even more worried because all of our special ed programs, our food programs, additional to rural schools are all federal funds. What's going to happen to those? We don't have the money state-wise to pick those up. I'm in a panic about that because I haven't seen it yet.
So, so you pointed to the likelihood, the possibility, and really the likelihood that all these critical programs will get gutted and that federal funds will be slashed, whether it's already happening, the Forest Service, jobs getting ripped away, Social Security Administration, Veterans Administration, all kinds of, Medicaid across the board. Some of this stuff will take acts of Congress that they want to do, and it isn't actively happening yet. Some of it has already happened. And it can leave you feeling really powerless, right? Like your question, what do you do about all this stuff? And then you'll hear leaders who are actually opposed to all these things saying things like, well, we don't have any leverage because we don't control Congress, we don't control the courts, we don't control the presidency, we don't have any leverage, so what do we do? One thing that I believe is there's one really big lever that we have. Those of us who actually believe that government ought to play some role in protecting people and improving people's lives. Not that you think government's the solution to every problem, but if you at least believe that public institutions are sometimes there to provide a legitimate function in protecting us and improving our lives, if you believe that, then you are on the side of the majority, both in this country and in many cases in the state. Most people in Idaho do not want to see Medicaid gutted, or the Veterans Administration gutted, or they don't want to see mass layoffs in the Forest Service. These aren't popular things. So those of us who believe that, who are actually opposed to these things, we're on the side of the majority. That doesn't, but here's the scary part. That doesn't mean we can stop these things from happening. But what it does mean, and I think this is critical, people have to get engaged. And one way to think about what we have to do is we've got to tell the stories of what's the personal stories of the harm being done. We've got to amplify, whether it's our personal stories or amplifying the stories of other people in our communities. That's what part of what we're trying to do when we launch a big town hall series on the voucher issue, is we're trying to give, local superintendents and teachers and trustees a platform in small towns all across the country to stand up and tell the stories about how this is going to hurt kids in the community. And those stories then go out in all the newspapers, and we get videos and get them out on social media, and we're telling those stories. Does that mean that we can prevent all the harm being done right now? No. But that becomes the foundation for the next several years. In my most hopeful moments, these are the kinds of things I think about. That what if this $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid that's looming on the horizon, if we can block it, if there's a moment like what happened about 8 years ago when John McCain famously did the thumbs down, and the effort to basically annihilate the Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act failed in the Senate, we might be able to replicate that this year nationwide, and that would be a huge victory. But here's what's even more on my mind. If we fail and they make deep cuts to Medicaid that affect people's lives all across Idaho and all across the nation, that could be the thing that puts us on the path to universal health care. Because if we are engaged enough to tell the stories of all the harm done, that could be like I've recently heard people use this metaphor for the vouchers issue. That could be like a Pearl Harbor moment where people wake up and they think, we need to, as Sally was saying so well earlier, we need to start caring about each other. There are people all across this country who are needlessly suffering because they don't have access to health care. Maybe finally we should join the rest of the civilized world and adopt a universal health care program for the United States of America. And that could be, that is a major silver lining when my view that when this is a part of my optimism, that in history, there's a tendency, people in power do really bad things, but not only that, they tend to overreach. And whenever they overreach, it creates an opportunity for things to swing back in the other direction. And I think that could happen with healthcare. It could happen with things like the VA. It could happen with education. They may very well be sowing the seeds of a major national movement in support of public education. That's certainly what we want to see happen in Idaho. But everything I'm saying, the optimistic view that I'm putting out there, is only going to happen if everyone gets engaged in every community. So that's my final word.
Well, as I've been sitting here, there's a couple of things that really stood out to me. One is, as Sally said, we need to care about each other, and I think that's so important. But also, as Lucas said, we need to fight the fight, and I think I think people are ready to fight the fight, to do something, and we may still be looking for what exactly that is to do. But it's there, and if the Twin Falls County Democrats can be of any value to that's what we want to provide to people, is give them things to do. And so and I'll make one last shameless plug for our Blue Dot Spring event on the 29th. We're even going to have a place set up for how to make signs and sign making equipment, big markers, boards, and all that stuff. in addition to these tables representing all these different groups. But I think interacting with all these different groups could help give you a better idea of things that we can do. So I want to thank our panel members one more time. Thank you, you guys. Really appreciate it. This is so informative. I want to thank everybody for coming and joining us tonight. We do have another town hall that we'll do on May 3rd with former Congressman Larry LaRocco and Richard Stallings, and that will be held here. Thanks again to the Soikas and to the Magic Valley Arts Council for letting us use this venue, so I hope you'll join us for that. That'll be a daytime event. That'll start at 11 o'clock in the morning and end at 1 because they've got an event up in Blaine County that evening that they're doing. But thank you again, everyone, for coming. And grab some cookies and drinks if you on the way out the door. Thanks again.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. That was good. That was so. Thank you, guys, so much.